Our hero thought to himself that if Renee really died at the hands of humans, maybe he should eliminate them as well? By this time, the administrator was already on the ground. A terrible horror had taken hold of his face, and with his last breath he shouted with all his might that the monster should not approach him. But in the next second he was dead. The young man had almost completely transformed into the giant monster. As if his friend was still there, he talked to her for a while. But someone's voice was getting louder and louder nearby, someone trying to get through to him, trying to get him to come to his senses and stop all this. It was his companion, the Demon Queen. She tugged hard at his sleeve. Still in his monster state, he turned to her. She wanted to ask him what had happened, she wanted answers. But the young man kept telling himself about one of his 36 masterpieces, the Dandu teeth. They were the only ones in the world. After a while, he turned back into an ordinary young man. And as far as the Demon Queen understood, this was truly a unique thing. She wanted to know what he was so angry about, why. He replied that it was his comrade's item and he had to return it. He then pulled his arm away and started to leave, saying that she had helped him enough, so she could go. He had found a way to get into town on his own, so he would go on from here. They had to get out of here quickly. People might come screaming. In that second, the Demon Queen seemed to realize everything. She called out to him, telling him that she knew who he was looking for. It was a girl. It was the same silver-haired dungeon monster who used the Dandu teeth, one of the 36 masterpieces, as a weapon. Renee's blade made. The girl realized she was right, judging by his reaction. He asked her not to provoke her unnecessarily, as he was in no condition to talk to her right now. He turned to her and said with the voice of a giant monster that she wanted to know too much. Maybe it's time to stop. But his voice only seemed to amuse the girl. She replied that she didn't really want to know any more and that she wasn't afraid when he spoke to her with that voice. She already knew who he really was. Renee is the gatekeeper who protects the great dungeon, the ultimate creature. Since he calls this girl a comrade, everything becomes clear at once. After all, this is the great boss of the dungeon, Mr. Swallow. By this time, the young man had already regained his usual youthful appearance. He almost said his real name, and thought she had guessed everything, but the next second the girl interrupted him. Laughing out loud, the Demon Queen said that he was his subordinate. She had figured it all out. Our hero exhaled with some relief, he felt better. She laughed and said that she solved it because she has a very developed mind. So she understands exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take revenge. And it's a dangerous enough undertaking. She will help him and no objections will be accepted. He finally managed to get some words out of her, telling her that she was a demon queen after all. Could she really go where she wanted because of such logic? Still laughing, she replied that you can't become a demon queen by being rational. But what she says becomes logic. That's not much of an excuse, our hero thought. Oh my God, it's that face again! Exclaimed the girl. He looked at her with his surprised eyes, but she laughed anyway, saying that she recognized her familiar friend now. He was so scary, really scary, and there were some black things coming out of his back. The girl emotionally described his recent transformation into a monster. And she's very happy that he's back in the way he used to be. He doesn't have to worry about anything else because now he has her with him. She came quite close to him, and took his hand and asked him not to speak to her in that horrible voice again. After a while, our heroes approached the building where the auction was to take place. It was a fancy, expensive building decorated with gold, and the people who attended it represented the aristocracy and nobility of the city. Meanwhile, the back entrance of this building was not at all noticeable to the common public, and as expected, there were not many guests here. There was only one guard guarding the entrance. The next moment, someone approached him and greeted him. Not long ago, the girl, now a beautiful member of a noble family, told the guard that she wanted to participate in the auction and asked him to pass. She was dressed incredibly expensively, with gold earrings and a diamond pendant around her neck. Still surprised, the guard didn't expect to see these people at the back entrance. He said they had to go through a background check first. The girl gave her fictitious name and said she represented a very famous family, and at her side was her servant. The guard quickly checked his logbook, but found no record of these guests. The girl replied that there was no such thing. Must have been a mix-up, but they still have an invitation to the event. What other invitation? The guard asked in surprise. There is no invitation for this event. But as soon as he had finished speaking, our hero approached him and struck him on the head with his fist. This is your invitation to the afterlife, our hero said. After that, they paid no attention to the guard lying nearby, and our hero noticed the new appearance of his friend. To which she replied that yes, she liked her look herself. But isn't he afraid he could easily fall in love with her now? They walked towards the entrance, still arguing about the fact that she was a child and he couldn't love her. She continued to pound his back with her fists. Meanwhile, in the gloomy and cold castle, in a spacious sandstone room, in a gorgeous bed, lay Renee. She couldn't stop saying out loud that she was now unlikely to be able to go back to the dungeon again. 80 years ago, a terrible fire destroyed most of the forest. It wasn't just a forest. Someone comforted his grandmother. He didn't think humans were capable of such a thing. This someone tried to calm the woman down by telling her that the forest would recover quickly, and she would be happy again. Isn't that right? This grandmother was the mistress of the forest, nicknamed the witch, the spirit of the earth. She paid those people with the same coin that they came to her with. She destroyed them all. The anger still overwhelmed her heart, and she couldn't forget what had happened. The man who calmed her down was our main character. This forest served as a natural fortress around his dungeon. He had to behave with dignity in her presence. She helped him a lot. This woman killed all the people who committed arson. Her rage should gradually subside, he told himself. But the next second he felt the presence of a creature sitting in a cage nearby. And that someone in the cage had no connection to the arsonists. And the longer our hero looked at her, the more he marveled at her. Isn't someone like her called a homunculus? He asked himself. Inside the cage was a little girl with green eyes. She was a creature made by humans, but she was not human. Our hero, either half human or half monster, thought it was worth killing her too, because there's no good in witnesses. However, he remembered the words of the man he had recently killed. It was his last will, the will of her master. You are free! He shouted at her. So you can go! Perhaps for the first time in a long time, our hero felt like doing just that. He felt some pity and compassion for her. But that didn't mean he would help her get out of here. She didn't care if she died here or outside the forest. With a slight effort, he opened the huge metal bars of the cage. Well, the choice was hers. Now she had to decide what to do. Still sitting on the cold stone floor, she looked up at him with her big green eyes, posing no threat. After all, she was a child, a little girl. Our hero told her that her master was looking for his maid. And since there were no other maids here, she must be the one. Whereupon he declared that his mercy ended here, turned around, and started to walk away. The girl followed him with her gaze, slowly stepping out of the cage and softly saying her name. And as he walked away, a trail of huge cobblestones flew in all directions. The name she spoke was that of a maid who assisted the head of the family she served. Or rather, it could be considered a title, for it was the name given to the most distinguished maid. Carefully, the girl stepped out of the cage with her bare feet. Gomonkel had no right to be treated like this, so the maid who served this family was a middle-aged woman. For this family, the girl was just another thing, and since that is the case, things don't get names. But she decided something for herself in that second, and her eyes lit up with hope. And we are brought back to our current reality, where Renee was sitting at the foot of a huge mountain next to a large castle. She looked down in silence as the mistress of the castle approached her, and informed her that a team sent by the Empire was on its way to this dungeon for another raid. The woman felt very sorry for the little girl. Renee replied that even though she said the dungeon was in danger, she couldn't go back there. The woman replied that she wasn't asking her to go back. This little girl's happiness was important to her, freedom of choice was a priority. She tried to convince her that she shouldn't burn all her bridges at once, because these two would travel across the continent to find her. She couldn't hide for that long. And if they find out that she has been tricked by humans, they will all be destroyed literally immediately. So if she's going to stay here, hiding from everyone, she's going to have to erase her tracks so that no one will ever find her again. Forever. The woman kept telling her that it wasn't necessary to do it perfectly, because when the skeleton warrior realized everything, he would make the right choice anyway. So she still had some time and a chance, while the raid on this most powerful dungeon would begin in the next few days. Everyone will be busy. Now is the best time to wrap things up. But as soon as she finished, she was interrupted by this little girl. She abruptly jumped up from her seat and said she couldn't just sit here anymore, she needed to take a walk, get some fresh air. The woman noticed that her right eye had become slightly cloudy. Wouldn't she like it to go with her as a helper and for safety's sake? The little creature thanked her friend for welcoming her so graciously into her castle, and told her not to worry about her. All she cared about was the whereabouts of her weapons, her blades. We are transported to the building where the auction took place. Our protagonist has one of the guards of the place pinned down. He had a tight grip on the man's neck, and it was clear from his expression that things were bad. Our hero wanted to know everything the man knew about Danda's teeth. The man could barely speak and struggled to say that the item was displayed from the wing tower. He knows nothing else. He begged to be spared and kept alive. Our hero thought that this was very interesting information. Is the wing mage tower really involved in this? He abruptly pulled his hand away, and the man fell to the ground from a great height. He thanked the guard for his honesty and said that he would let him live for it. The man saw them off with a glance and came to his senses. It was unclear to him what his fault was. I mean, he's just a security guard, and they're some kind of crazy people. He repeated this several times, but it seems to have been in vain, as he once again caught our hero's attention. The young man approached him and his eyes lit up with monster fire again. Does this man really think he's innocent? And in the next second, to the horror of the man sitting near the wall, our protagonist began to transform back into a monster. The main character was angered by the guard's words that he was supposedly innocent. He reminded him that people say things like that when they come onto his property. He said that people always use words like conquering the land, or conquering another dungeon, or some raid, but never once have they called it a massacre. As he continued to talk to this man, he gradually turned into a huge monster, and the end of this guard was near. Have these people never felt remorse for killing monsters? How did the dungeon dwellers deserve to be treated like this? What did they do wrong? He added that he would play by their own rules, since they were enemies. Meanwhile, in the main hall of the exquisite building, an auction was being held. In this luxurious room, everyone was trying to place their bets. The air was filled with the shouts of the audience. Everyone was trying to outdo each other for the right to own a very unique item. There were two people watching the noisy crowd from the side. They might have wanted to participate in the auction as well, but their job was to protect the place. They were members of an order of knights called the Black Wolf. The girl seemed to joke a bit about participating in the auction, and her colleague reminded her of their main mission here. As they thought about getting the auction over with, a man on stage shouted loudly and asked if there were any more bids. He then announced loudly to the entire audience that the lot would be sold in 3 bills. But the next second, someone from above shouted at him. "Why all of a sudden?" asked a demonic voice. Huge dark tentacles began to crawl onto the stage. A second later, the man was already dead, and our protagonist declared that only he had the right to end the auction. He was beyond angry and addressed the audience in a terrifying voice. "Did you really come here to buy Danda's teeth?" This chapter is about heroes. There are only 3 heroes in the Empire. Unfortunately, one of them is already dead. He died in a dangerous dungeon while fighting the monster that was our main character. Therefore, after his death, the public criticized the others, saying that he died because of his pride. Although he was a hero, his first priority was to protect the people. And the anger of the crowd, which was originally directed at the dead hero, was naturally transferred to the remaining 2 living heroes. And one of those two characters is a young girl with an iron glove on her hand. She had to regain the trust of the people of the Empire. But she didn't dare to attack the huge monster standing on the stage. Her fighting spirit was overwhelmed by the instinct of self-preservation screaming from within. She was almost ready to enter the battle, but she was stopped by someone's hand. It was her trusty battle buddy who said there was no way they could interfere right now. Terror and fear gripped the two girls as they realized how powerful and dangerous the monster on stage was. At that moment, our protagonist approached the pedestal where the object he had been searching for so long was hidden under a crystal hood. He couldn't believe that this blade was the one he was looking for and that it was real. For a second he thought it might be a fake, but Renee's footprints were clearly visible. It was her weapon. With a slight movement of his fingers, he tilted back the crystal container that covered the weapon. If he only found out that the girl had died at the hands of these people, he would destroy everyone sitting in the hall right now. He turned to the crowd and said that it would be difficult for him to explain the situation that was happening, but he assured them that this weapon had an owner. He was filled with anger and rage. Sure, he felt a little bad that these people would give away such fabulous money, but he should be believed. At this time, the crowd in the hall fell backwards in horror at what they had just seen. Some of the men in the audience shouted loudly for the guards to waste no time in restoring order. "We must catch this man on stage at all costs," yelled one of the men. Hearing this, our hero told them that since they didn't want to let him go, it was up to them. He wanted it himself, and is ready to destroy them all. He's ready to take this building and run them all into the ground with it. He was about to attack the people sitting in the front rows, but in the next second, someone came down from above with a loud scream. It was the same warrior girl, the hero, who had been standing in the distance earlier, reluctant to enter the fray. Our hero noted that she had pretty good moves and weapons, though he disparagingly called her a flying squirrel. Well, her first blow missed him. Too clumsily, our hero thought to himself. He stood still and turned his attention to her gloves. Is that really all she has? This time, the girl prepared for another strike. Fear gripped her entire body, but she had no choice since her duel had already begun. She swung her arm hard and flew towards our hero. In return, he thought, he'd just break her arms. Although she was not bad for a human, she was no danger to him, our hero thought. At that moment, the girl activated the special method of her weapon called crushing. The next second, her fist flew towards our hero, who was about to grab her glove with his hand. At that moment, his eyes widened in surprise, and in the next second, he was thrown a long distance into the wall, and huge chunks of concrete and marble were scattered around. It was a very powerful blow from the girl, so powerful that she worried about the safety of her weapon. From afar, somewhere deep in the clouds of raised dust, our hero pronounced that she was not so simple. Much to the surprise of the girl, who had expected him to die after such a blow. Horror gripped her again, and she couldn't understand how he could still be alive. It simply couldn't be. This technique wouldn't even leave a mark on most dungeon bosses. To her dismay, the glove that normally held 3 blows fell apart into one. Her primary weapon was completely destroyed. She looked at the creature and couldn't figure out who he was. Maybe he's not human. Some kind of black liquid? Or maybe it's gas? It didn't look like a normal monster. Then what is he? The girl wondered as she watched her enemy slowly get to his feet. The next second, he laughed out loud in his demonic voice and said he was sorry. It's a shame that this girl has to die right now. But someone had called to her, someone was about to come to her rescue. It was her battle teammate who ran forward with great speed to attack. She was determined to strike, and huge, bright blue flashes of lightning began to come out of her hand. Some time later, our hero was sitting in the ruins of an auction house. Standing next to him was the Demon Queen, who was very concerned about what had just happened. She wanted to know if he was okay. He quickly replied that he was fine and that she could rest easy. After everything she had seen, after the building had been leveled by a huge explosion, she thought he was already dead, so tears rolled down her cheeks. The young man looked at her and said he was fine. To himself, he remembered that the punch of that girl was not made by an ordinary person, because if it hit him in the heart, then definitely nothing good would happen to him. It would just scare him even more and he might turn into a huge monster again. She scared him. He'd better be dead, he thought. He felt ashamed, because if the skeleton warrior found out about this, he would get a lot of criticism. He suddenly came to his senses and looked somewhere in the distance, realizing that he had missed these two heroes. He could not defeat them in this battle. He still called them flying squirrels. There were two of them, especially the one with pink hair. While she distracted him, the other one with the blue hair evacuated everyone and even gave her several layers of protective magic. He had not expected this kind of behavior from humans at all. He was eager for a new experience. A sarcastic smile appeared on his face and he said, "How funny!" Shards of the destroyed building still fell to the ground, and the townspeople realized that something had collapsed somewhere, that something had happened. Some couldn't even understand what was going on. The crowd turned to the girl lying on the ground. Everyone wanted to help her. She clearly needed help. One of the men shouted loudly for security to be called. "No, I'd rather have a doctor." The girl was unconscious for a while. She was unable to speak. "She's a hero," she thought to herself. But she was thrown to the ground by a monster whose name she doesn't even know. She was curious to know if the people from the auction were okay, if they had all had time to evacuate. The people around her helped her up and she told them her name. They all recognized her as their hero. It seemed to her that they spoke to her very quietly. In fact, she was a little dazed from the fight she just had, and there was still a ringing in her head. At that time, her pink-haired friend approached her with a slight smile on her face. They were very happy to see each other. Immediately, the blue-haired girl had tears streaming down her cheeks. Of course, this brave girl should have thanked her friend, because if it wasn't for her, the preparations for her funeral would be in full swing right now. Tears were still streaming from her eyes. She looked at her friend and said a small thank you in a trembling voice. She was curious what had become of her hand. It was clear that her friend had lost her arm in the battle. Being a brave and courageous warrior, or perhaps because they were in the presence of other people, her friend replied that she was fine, that her life was not in danger. Although sweat continued to pour down her face, she found it difficult to speak. The next second, the girl threw herself on her neck and told her to forgive her. Tears flowed from her eyes even more. She'll probably be removed as a hero now, since she's the reason why all this happened. But the pink-haired hero girl pulled her friend back sharply and told her to clean herself up. She's a hero after all. If the hero of the empire acts like a show-off, does she really think people will like it? You have to be strong. After a while, when they had calmed down, the girl informed her that an arm was only a small casualty of what had happened to them. She needs to know who her real opponent was in this fight. It was Swallow, the boss of this most powerful dungeon. The young warrior thought her friend must be joking. It's not funny to hear such words. Why would such a powerful monster come here among humans? But with a very stern voice, her friend replied that she didn't know the reasons, but that he had come here, that was for sure. It was definitely him. Black Catastrophe. The old monster of Swallow. She could tell it was him because there was a pile of dead heroes' footprints at his feet. They were fresh, less than a month old. So the situation is much worse than they thought. If things continue like this, the empire might come to an end. Only now did the girl realize what had really happened. She sat on the ground in utter confusion. And in a second, she was seized with horror, and with a loud cry she began to say, "If it really was him, they must make even more effort. This is the land of the people, here they have the advantage." Her friend reassured the young girl again and told her that this was not a problem they could solve on their own. She had felt this intense fear herself, which was why they needed help. The more experienced warrior explains that there is no chance of victory now. She will go to the Dungeon Raid Command Center and ask for reinforcements. Afterwards, she will report on the situation of the Imperial family. In her current state, it would be difficult to teleport two people, so this girl must stay here. In the next second, she had already activated her light healing magic, causing the girl's shoulder to burn slightly. Unfortunately, she told her, she couldn't heal her completely, so she shouldn't hang around the city and should wait for the main forces to arrive. And in the next instant, the woman began to bounce off the ground as she activated her ability to teleport to another location. Looking in her direction, the girl on the ground shouted that this monster could appear at any moment and come back here, but she was told to wait anyway. The hero flew up somewhere and kept repeating that no matter what happened, she shouldn't go anywhere, she should stay here and wait with the rest of the warriors. A second later, the girl disappeared somewhere high in the sky. Meanwhile, standing in front of the ruins of the once beautiful building, our hero continued to think to himself that everything had somehow turned out very unfortunate. He didn't know what to do next. Maybe he should just leave the runaways behind and head for the city. Or would it be better to catch up with the dangerous ones and get rid of them? And while he pondered what to do next, the Demon Queen watched his actions. Well, he seems to have made up his mind. Now that he's got Dunda's teeth back, we can stop there. Still, he has an underlying purpose that should not be forgotten. He has to find Renee, even if it is only her dead body. Then he turned to his friend and told her to get ready because they were leaving. But this time, his partner seemed less than enthusiastic, and there was a slight wistfulness and sadness on her face. Our hero didn't understand what was wrong with her. Like any girl in such a situation, she replied that nothing had happened to her and that he shouldn't worry. But he insisted and asked her to answer his question and tell him what was wrong with her. She looked down and said in a low voice, the look on his face telling him. With some trepidation, she turned to him and said he was very strong. She noticed it the moment she'd seen him in the castle. And the more she got to know him, the stronger he proved to be, exceeding her expectations. She was a little afraid of what she saw. Her hands even seemed to tremble slightly. Even though he called himself a comrade of the girl he was looking for, he looks much more powerful than her. Maybe I'm wrong, the Demon Queen said, or maybe Renee is really much stronger than I know. Now, she insisted that he answer her question. Who are you? She turned to him and looked straight into his eyes. And in the next second our hero found nothing better than to scratch the back of his head and to bring her to her senses with a light fist blow on her friend's head. He tried to cheer her up, telling her that she was his favorite little silly girl and that she didn't need to be so down in the dumps. He'll be sure to tell her the whole truth after they've taken care of everything. You just have to wait a little longer. Then he turned the conversation to another topic and suggested that she clean up the place so that she could show him the power of a demon queen. With a quick flick of her hand, the girl threw her cloak aside, and in the next instant, she reappeared in her second incarnation as the most beautiful demon queen. After a moment, she had already activated her special reconstruction magic. A huge pink orb enveloped the space around our heroes. Loud peals of thunder and a flash of pink light could be seen and heard in the distance throughout the city. Then there was an explosion so powerful that the shockwave spread for miles around. Panic and terror gripped the people. No one could figure out what was going on. Everyone could see a huge column of smoke rising in the shape of a large mushroom, where the real battle with the demon had just taken place. The hero girl, who was watching everything that was happening, couldn't believe her eyes. She knew the place because she had just been there. It was an auction. And it was in the heart of the capital. Someone from the crowd shouted that this was his home. Does this monster have no idea how many people can live in a capital city? Does he really want to raze this place to the ground? She didn't know what to do, as an older comrade had ordered her to stay here and wait for the main force to arrive. But deep inside, as a true warrior, she was still ready to go and protect all the townspeople. She almost left her seat and went forward, but at that moment she was stopped by a little boy who told her that his father was there. After that, all doubts fell away and she ran forward with great vigor. The person reassured everyone that everything was fine, that they shouldn't worry, and that she would totally figure it out. The girl put her iron gauntlet back on and began to stride toward the center of town. She won't lose to this monster. The clouds of smoke and dust dissipated, and now not only was the auction house itself completely destroyed, but many nearby structures as well. It was nothing but ruins. Somewhere amidst all the rocks and debris, our protagonist's foot appeared. Barely out of the rubble, he turned to his girlfriend, who had made this huge mess, with an angry voice. He was very curious as to what kind of magic she had used to destroy so many structures. The Demon Queen replied that it was a special reconstruction magic, a supreme earth-shattering magic. Doesn't he like the order and cleanliness she just brought? Still flying through the air, she laughingly pointed to the ruins where houses once stood. Our hero asked in an annoyed voice, why doesn't she have something more appropriate for the occasion? The girl replied that he needn't blame her. Hadn't he asked her to clean up the place? He was hinting at using the most powerful spell, wasn't he? I think she got everything mixed up again. She descended to the ground and sat down on a large rock in front of him. Still shaking the dust from his clothes, he looked at her in silence. She added that it should have been explained in detail how she was supposed to do it. So he couldn't complain now. He replied that he thought she understood. The next second, our hero felt the approach of a large group of men. The situation is getting more heated. Then he turned to his friend and asked her if she remembered the way to the teleport. Of course, the girl replied cheerfully. I remember exactly, she said. He asked her to go there right away and protect the teleport, because people would run there now and he had something else to do. She didn't understand such an abrupt change in his behavior, and had absolutely no idea what he was up to. He asked her to get everything ready because as soon as he returned, they would go to the city. The girl nodded her head. Then she shouted back that she had absolutely no idea where this town was. The young man turned around and asked her if she knew the coordinates of his dungeon. With great pomp, the girl declared that of course she did, for, as she had said before, this was her favorite dungeon of all. But the young man didn't let her finish and told her that this was the closest town to his dungeon. After thinking for a while, the Demon Queen added that she actually only knew about this dungeon from books. Our hero realized a long time ago that she's making a lot of things up. After that, he turned around and walked away, and she soared up on her magical pink wings, saying that she would fly to defend the teleporter from the humans. He approached the edge of the once large neighborhood, now a solid ruin, and noticed a group of men emerging from the haze. There were quite a few of them, but he couldn't count them all because they were still hidden by the dust and smoke of the destruction. One of the warriors began to speak, saying that they belonged to one of the 9 pillars of the empire. It was a punitive unit of the ranger family called the Blue Crane. A man with a mask on his face and a scar over his left eye introduced himself and said he was Casper, the squad leader. And who are you? He turned to our hero. The young man looked at them in silence for a while, thinking once again that these people were all dressed to the nines, as usual. And why are they always like that? Actually, he's not surprised that so many people have come here, because it's probably the wars of someone who attended the auction earlier. And after a pause, he spoke. In a low voice, addressing this crowd, he said, If you want to know who I am, I will tell you now. I am your enemy. His eyes once again glowed with yellow light, and he began to transform into a huge, vicious monster. The fate of this group was sealed. Meanwhile, in the dungeon where only one skeleton warrior remained, equally interesting events were taking place. Another group of warriors came this way, led by Nifrim. Someone turned to him and said, Of all those who have entered this cave, none have returned alive. And if they die here, their soul will be corrupted and wander the world until the end of time. The young warrior obviously didn't like what he heard. It was his companion, a warrior girl with green hair. She was afraid to go any further and suggested that he go back. Isn't he afraid of what's going on here? He asked her not to joke like that because it was very serious, to which the girl replied that he was very boring and she would continue to joke. But the next second, they were approached by one of the warriors who said that this place seemed rather suspicious to him, because the first room they went through had a pile of monster corpses, while this room they were in now was very clean. Thanks to the magic used by the mages in their party, they could see far around them. Yellow orbs of light flew and swirled in the sky, lighting their way into this dark cave. The seasoned warrior and mage sensed that something was amiss. Obviously, someone had cleaned up and was waiting for their visit. But the rest of the team didn't seem to realize that something very strange and sinister was going on here. They were still trying to figure out who could have cleaned this place up. Obviously not a team from the past during their passing offensive. Maybe there's some kind of monster with intelligence here. And while the group of warriors continued to argue and discuss the reason for the lack of corpses in this room, Nifrim silently watched from the sidelines and began to suspect that someone was waiting for their visit and watching everything from the outside. In the next second, he turned around and shouted loudly somewhere off to the side that he had stopped mocking them and that this monster wouldn't be able to fool them no matter how hard he tried. His yell was so loud that the reverberation of his voice echoed throughout this vast dungeon for a long time. Then, from somewhere far away, someone spoke to them and said that this young man's voice was too high. This someone's bones were even shaking. Anyway, no one fooled them. He cleaned up the place because he hated to see that messy room. They couldn't see who it was, but they could see the glow of two small blue lights in the distance. Nifrim quickly ordered his friend to light the new magic orbs. They needed light to see this monster. And in the next second, a skeleton warrior appeared in front of their eyes and said that he was very happy to meet them. In a mocking tone, he added that it had become quite bright. Although he didn't call out to them, he was very happy that they were able to come to such a precious place. "Well done, you miserable humans," the skeleton warrior said. Nifrim knew who was standing before him. He turned around and asked him, "Are you really that Death Knight?" The skeleton warrior teased him again, saying that he was very surprised to be recognized. After all, he had worked so hard all day to introduce and present himself properly. "Thank you, humans," the monster said. After that, he suggested that they surrender because he thought they were too bloodthirsty. The warriors should lay down their fists and weapons, and the mages should put away their wands. But no sooner had the skeleton finished speaking than the next second, the warrior rushed to attack. With tremendous force, he tried to strike his blade directly at the skeleton's head. But his attack was easily stopped by the monster's hand. Joking again, the skeleton warrior said that they had no manners at all, and they didn't even let him catch his breath. But this mage didn't want to stop, so in the next instant, huge ice spikes flew at the monster. It was a gigantic avalanche, like a wave. But the skeleton warrior didn't seem afraid at all, saying that fighting the crowd alone wasn't in his plans. Nevertheless, the victory would be his. But this warrior had no intention of stopping. He struck one blow after another. That's why he was able to knock that monster down. After that, the skeleton warrior's sword flew to the side. What an unexpected development, the monster thought. Oh, impressive for a human, how he would praise this warrior. In the next instant, with an acid smile, the young man began to use most of the spells he had prepared. Strong body, omen reading, light feather, silent step, boiling blood, ashes from the bones of a famous warrior. He recited one spell after another. But this monster didn't seem to be afraid of any of his spells and realized that they couldn't last long. He grabbed the hilt of his sword. Then he pretended to be affected by all those spells. He thought to himself that he only had to hold out for a minute. And do nothing for now. Bright flashes illuminated everything around them. One spell after the other changed. And it seemed as if they really worked on him, because the monster sat motionless. The young man came quite close and put his boot on the skeleton. He pinned it to the ground and asked, "What does he think? Who is going to beat who today?" For what seemed like the first time in his cave life, the skeleton warrior screamed in despair, unable to believe that magic could bring him to a stalemate. This warrior, as well as the rest of the party, had not expected the battle to end so easily. This dungeon isn't as scary as they say, Nifrim thought to himself. The skeleton tried to say something, but the warrior ordered him to shut up. Then he prepared a crushing blow and tried to stab the skeleton in the eye with a cry of, "Die!" However, in the next second, his powerful strike was easily stopped by the skeleton warrior's 3 fingers. The next moment, the skeleton laughed out loud as he lay on the ground, saying that he had gotten into his role very well this time. Horror gripped the young man, and a cold sweat ran down his back. He realized that all his efforts were in vain. Again, the skeleton said mockingly that he had been very bored the last few years, so he wanted to experience something new. So he tried acting. In a demonic voice, he thanked them for playing along. The very next second, his eyes began to glow even brighter, which did not bode well for the warriors who came here.